The alarms on my flagship went silent 3 seconds before the first report came in, and that silence told me more than the noise ever could. My name is Vantor Kesh, and I have led the conquest of 11 worlds. I know the sound of a battle beginning. I know the sound of a battle ending. What I heard that day was neither. It was the sound of something starting that had no name in any language I understood. We had taken the human colony of Eldenholm without much trouble. Their defense fleet was outdated, their shield generators were weak, and their soldiers, brave as they were, could not stand against 300 years of my empire's engineering. Within 6 hours of our arrival, their capital city had surrendered. Within 12 hours, my troops had secured every major settlement on the surface. It was, by every measure I had ever used, a clean victory. I stood on the bridge of my ship, the Ashen Crown, looking down at the blue and green world turning slowly beneath us. My second in command, a sharp-eyed officer named Dreyes, stood beside me with a datapad glowing in his hand. "Casualties on our side are minimal, General," Dreyes said, "fewer than we expected for a world of this size." "Humans fight hard for something so small," I said. "But size was never their strength. It was numbers and stubbornness. We removed both advantages before they could use them. I had studied dozens of species before humans. Some fought with cold logic, calculating every loss before it happened. Some fought with blind loyalty to a hive mind, sacrificing themselves without hesitation because their queen commanded it. Others simply surrendered the moment resistance became pointless, understanding that survival mattered more than pride. I expected humans to fall into one of these categories. My advisors told me they were closest to the second kind, driven by tribal loyalty and emotion, rather than pure strategy. I did not think much of the difference. Emotion, in my experience, made enemies predictable. Predictable enemies are easy to defeat. Our first task after securing a world was always the same. We gathered the population into processing centers, sorted them by age, ability, and usefulness, and began the slow work of turning conquered people into cooperative citizens of the empire. It was not cruelty, it was efficiency. A world that resists forever is a world that costs resources forever, and my empire had learned long ago that a settled population is worth more than a burning one. Dreyes read from his pad as we walked toward the tactical room. "The processing centers report full capacity by tomorrow morning. We have already begun separating adults for labor assignment. Elderly humans are being registered for support roles, and there is a note here about the youngest ones." "The youngest ones?" "Their offspring, General. We have 3 facilities holding what the humans call children. Nursery habitats, schools, that sort of structure. They were swept up along with everyone else during the collection sweeps. Standard procedure was followed. No incidents reported." I remember nodding without much thought. It was a small detail among thousands of small details that crossed my desk every hour during an occupation. Housing assignments, food distribution, water reclamation. The children were simply another line in a very long list, no different from crop yields or fuel reserves. I did not linger on it. I had 11 conquered worlds behind me, and a 12th, now beginning, and none of them had ever given me reason to linger on such details before. "Good," I said. "Keep the sweeps organized. I want full integration reports within the week." Dreyes nodded and moved on to the next item, something about a mining facility that needed new management. I barely heard him. My mind was already on the next phase of occupation, the long, slow process of turning a fallen world into a functioning part of the empire. I had done this 11 times. I expected the 12th to be no different. That night, I stood alone on the observation deck, watching the lights of human cities flicker across the dark side of the planet. There was something almost peaceful about it, seeing a conquered world settle into stillness. No explosions, no resistance fire lighting up the sky, just quiet cities, waiting to be reshaped. I did not know, standing there, that somewhere below me, in 3 different buildings, scattered across 3 different continents, something had gone wrong. I did not know that word of what happened in those buildings was already spreading faster than any communication network I controlled. I did not know that the quiet I found so peaceful was not surrender at all. It was the held breath before a scream. The first sign that something was different came 2 days later, and it arrived in the most ordinary way possible, a routine supply report that did not add up. My logistics officer, a careful and unremarkable soldier named Threll, brought it to my attention during our morning briefing. "General, we have a discrepancy in Convoy 7, Threll said. "It was scheduled to arrive at the Eastern Settlement 6 hours ago. It has not arrived, and we have lost contact with the escort." "Mechanical failure?" I asked. "The terrain on that continent is difficult." "Possibly, General. We are sending a recovery team now." I did not think much of it. Convoys failed sometimes. Vehicles broke down. Signals were lost in mountainous terrain. It was the kind of small problem that occupation forces dealt with constantly, and I had far larger matters demanding my attention that day, including a dispute between 2 of my regional commanders over resource allocation. I told Threll to keep me informed and moved on with my morning. By evening, the recovery team had not reported back either. I remember the exact moment I stopped thinking of it as routine. Draze entered the tactical room with a look on his face I had rarely seen from him in the 3 years he had served under my command. He was not alarmed exactly. He was confused, and Draze was not a soldier who confused easily. "General, we have lost both the convoy and the recovery team. Total silence from both. No distress signals. No wreckage located by our scanners." "No wreckage," I repeated. "Then they are somewhere, simply not transmitting." That is what we assumed as well, so we sent a third team, better equipped, with orbital scanning support this time. "And?" Drauz hesitated, which was unlike him. "We found the vehicles, General. All of them. Parked in formation along the eastern road, exactly where they should have been. No damage to the exteriors that our scans could detect. No sign of an ambush. No craters. No burn marks. Nothing consistent with a weapon strike." "Then where are my soldiers?" "They were not there, General. The vehicles were empty." I sat with that information for a long moment, turning it over in my mind the way I turned over any tactical puzzle. Empty vehicles, undamaged, sitting exactly where they should be. No bodies, no blood, no sign of struggle. It did not match anything in my experience. An ambush left wreckage. A retreat left abandoned equipment in disarray, not neat formation. This was something else, something deliberate and careful, and deliberate, careful actions from an enemy always concerned me more than chaos did. "Increase security around all convoys," I ordered. "Double the escort on anything moving between settlements, and I want eyes on that road at all times, orbital and ground both." "Yes, General." I did not sleep well that night. It was not fear, not yet. It was the particular unease of a soldier who has spent his career learning patterns and who has just encountered something with no pattern he recognized. 3 more incidents occurred over the following week, each one stranger than the last. A supply depot on the northern continent lost 20 crates of equipment overnight, taken without triggering a single alarm, without a single guard reporting anything unusual, without a single trace of forced entry. A communications relay went silent for 6 hours and came back online with no explanation, though our diagnostic teams found nothing wrong with it. And most troubling of all, a squad of my soldiers assigned to guard one of the processing centers simply stopped responding to check-ins, and when a team was sent to investigate, they found the guard post empty and the equipment left behind in perfect condition, as though the soldiers had simply walked away mid-shift. Drauz brought me the compiled reports on the 8th day of the occupation, and I could see in the way he organized the datapad that he had been trying to find a pattern of his own before bringing it to me. "I have looked at this from every angle I can think of, General," he said. "Guerrilla resistance does not behave this way. Resistance fighters want to be seen. They want to send a message, strike fear, prove they are still fighting. This is different. This is quiet. Whatever is happening here does not want to be seen at all. Show me the locations," I said. He pulled up a map of the continent, marking each incident with a small red point of light. I studied it for a long moment, and something about the pattern nagged at the edge of my thinking, something I could not yet name. Cross-reference these locations with the processing centers, I said. Dreyes did, and the map redrew itself. Every single incident, without exception, had occurred along a route that led either toward or away from one of our 3 processing centers holding the youngest humans. The supply convoy that vanished had been carrying rations meant for the Eastern Center. The missing equipment crates had come from a depot that supplied security systems to the Western Center. The guard post that emptied itself belonged to the perimeter of the central facility. That is a strange coincidence, I said slowly. I do not think it is a coincidence at all, General, Dreyes replied. I looked at the map for a long time, at the 3 glowing points where we held the smallest and most defenseless of the human population, and at the pattern of disappearances circling each one like a slow, tightening loop. Something cold moved through me then, though I could not yet explain why. I had faced armies before. I had faced ambushes, sabotage, uprisings, and betrayals from within my own ranks. I had never faced silence shaped so precisely around one particular target. Pull additional forces to reinforce those 3 locations, I said. I want double the garrison at each center by morning. Yes, General, Dreyes said, already turning to relay the order. Then he paused at the door and looked back at me. General, if I may ask, what do you think is happening? I did not have an answer for him that night. I only knew that whatever was moving through the shadows of this conquered world, it was not behaving like anything I had studied, and it was moving with a purpose I did not yet understand. I told myself it was simply an unusual resistance tactic, a clever strategy from a defeated enemy trying to reclaim some ground before final submission. I told myself many things that night, standing again on the observation deck, watching the same quiet lights I had admired only a week before. They did not look peaceful anymore. They looked like they were waiting. I did not know it then, but somewhere in the shadows of those 3 continents, humans were moving with a discipline and a purpose that had nothing to do with military doctrine and everything to do with something far older, far deeper, and far more dangerous than any strategy my empire had ever trained me to face. I had taken their world. I had taken their cities. I had taken their freedom. And without fully understanding what I had done, I had taken their children. The silence that followed was not the silence of a defeated people. It was the silence of a people counting the hours until they had their strength back. The reinforcements arrived at the 3 processing centers within a day, just as I had ordered, and for a short while, the silence I feared seemed to fade. No convoys vanished, no equipment disappeared, no guard posts emptied themselves in the night. Dreyes reported the calm to me each morning with a cautious kind of relief, the relief of a soldier who does not yet trust the quiet, but wants very much to. I did not share his relief. I had learned long ago that silence after unexplained trouble is rarely the end of anything. It is usually the middle. On the 11th day of the occupation, the quiet ended all at once, and it ended in a way that told me everything I had been refusing to understand. I was reviewing labor assignment reports in the tactical room when Dreyes entered without requesting permission, which he had never done before in 3 years of service. His face had lost its usual composure entirely. General, the Western Processing Center has gone dark. Define dark, I said, already rising from my seat. All communication lost. All security feeds lost. Simultaneously, 11 seconds ago, I have a strike team assembling to move in immediately. I am going with them, I said, and Dreyes did not argue, though I could see he wanted to. The flight to the Western continent took 20 minutes, and in that time I tried to prepare myself for every possibility I could imagine. A prison uprising, an external attack from human resistance forces using weapons we had not accounted for, equipment failure combined with unfortunate timing. I ran through every scenario my long career had taught me to expect from a conquered world in rebellion. Nothing prepared me for what we found. The processing center itself stood intact. No structural damage. No scorch marks along the walls. No breached doors or broken windows. From the outside, it looked exactly as it had the day we built it, converted from what had once been a human school into a facility for sorting and holding the youngest members of the population. My strike team moved in formation through the front entrance, weapons raised, expecting resistance at every corner. We found none. We found no one at all. The guards assigned to the facility were gone, every single one, without a trace of struggle. Their equipment lay neatly stacked near the entrance, as though they had simply set it down and walked away. The security systems had been disabled with a precision that suggested inside knowledge rather than brute force. Every camera and sensor deactivated within the same 11 seconds Dre's had reported. And in the holding areas, where 230 human children had been registered that very morning, there was nothing left but empty rooms, small chairs pushed neatly against the walls, and silence so complete it felt like a physical presence. I walked through those rooms myself, something I rarely did during an occupation, preferring to receive reports rather than witness details firsthand. I do not know why I felt compelled to see it with my own eyes that day. Perhaps some part of me already understood that this was different from anything I had led before, and that understanding it would require more than data pads and second-hand accounts. The rooms were clean, untouched by violence of any kind. Someone had come, and someone had gone, and in between, 230 children and every soldier assigned to guard them had simply vanished from a secured facility without a single alarm sounding. "General," Dreaz said quietly beside me, "this was not an attack. Attacks leave damage. This was a retrieval." "A retrieval," I repeated, testing the word. "You believe this was planned?" "I believe this was planned before we even landed on this world, General. I believe someone knew exactly how our processing system worked, exactly where the children would be held, and exactly how to move through our security without triggering a single response. This was not luck. This was preparation. I thought of the missing convoy, the vanished equipment, the guard post that emptied itself days before this happened. Small pieces, each one seemingly unconnected, each one now fitting into a shape I finally understood. Every disappearance had been a step toward this moment. Every quiet incident had been reconnaissance, resource gathering, positioning. Whoever was behind this had been patient in a way that unsettled me more than any battlefield fury ever could. We searched the surrounding area for hours, extending outward from the facility in every direction, and found nothing. No vehicle tracks leading away, no thermal signatures our scanners could follow, no trace of 230 children and a full garrison of soldiers, as though the ground itself had opened and swallowed them whole. By the time I returned to the Ashen Crown that night, reports had come in from the other two processing centers as well. The eastern facility remained secure, though the guards there described a strange sense of being watched throughout the day, a feeling none of them could substantiate with any actual sighting. The central facility, holding the largest number of children, had increased its own security independently after hearing what happened in the west, doubling patrols and sealing every entrance. It made no difference. 2 nights later, the central facility fell exactly the same way. No damage, no alarms, no trace. 310 children gone, along with every soldier assigned to their guard. I stood in the tactical room that night with Drazes and my senior officers gathered around me, and for the first time since I had taken command of this campaign, I did not know what to say. My officers looked to me the way soldiers always look to their commander in moments of confusion, waiting for an explanation that would make the impossible make sense again. I had none to give them. "This cannot be human resistance fighters," said one of my commanders, an officer named Vesic who had served with me on 3 previous campaigns. "No resistance movement has this level of coordination, this level of restraint. Resistance fighters want casualties on our side. They want to send a message. This has no message. This is simply removal." "Then what is it?" another officer asked. Nobody answered. I sent word to the last remaining facility, the Eastern Center, ordering its complete evacuation to a more heavily fortified location within the capital city, believing that consolidating our forces would finally give us the advantage of numbers. The transfer was scheduled for the following morning, with 3 full companies of soldiers assigned to escort the convoy. The convoy never reached its destination. It was not ambushed on the road, as I had feared. It arrived at the capital exactly on schedule, vehicles intact, escort present and accounted for. But when the transport doors opened, the children who had been loaded that morning were gone, and in their place, every soldier who had ridden in the same vehicles as those children sat frozen in their seats, unharmed but completely unable to explain what had happened. They described feeling suddenly and inexplicably tired during the journey, a heaviness they could not fight, and then waking as the convoy rolled to a stop, with no memory of anything in between. My physicians found no injuries, no signs of any weapon or chemical agent, nothing at all to explain the lost time except for the plain fact that it had happened. That night, I called every officer under my command into the largest meeting hall aboard the Ashen Crown, and I stood before them without the confidence I had always carried into such gatherings. I had led these officers through 11 conquered worlds. I had never once stood before them without an answer. I want theories, I said. I want every possibility considered, no matter how strange it seems. We are dealing with an enemy who moves through our defenses as though they do not exist, who takes hundreds of children and full garrisons of trained soldiers without leaving a single trace, and who has done this 3 times in the span of 2 weeks. This is not ordinary resistance. I need to understand what we are facing before it happens a 4th time. Vesic spoke first. General, I have reviewed everything we know about human military history in preparation for this campaign, as protocol requires. There is precedent for coordinated, silent operations of this kind, though nothing on this scale that I have found. Special Forces units trained for exactly this sort of precision work. Special Forces do not erase all trace of 200 children and a garrison of armed soldiers without triggering a single sensor, Draze said. There is something else happening here. Then what would you suggest? Vesic asked, an edge of frustration in his voice that I understood completely, because I felt it too. Dryas was quiet for a moment before he answered, and when he did, his voice carried a caution I had never heard from him before. General, I have spent the last 2 days reviewing human historical records, trying to find any precedent for what we are facing. I found something troubling in nearly every era of their history, across every culture and every nation on that world, regardless of how different those cultures were from one another, in almost every other way. Go on, I said. There is a pattern, General, a pattern that appears again and again whenever a threat comes near the youngest members of their species. It does not matter how peaceful the culture was before. It does not matter how disorganized or divided they were on every other matter. When their children are threatened, humans do not respond the way other species do. They do not calculate. They do not weigh losses against gains. Something changes in them, something that overrides every ordinary instinct for self-preservation. I felt something shift in the room as Draze spoke, a quiet unease spreading among officers who had conquered species far more physically dangerous than humans, without ever feeling what I now felt gathering in my chest. I am not yet certain what we are facing, General, Draze continued. But I no longer believe this is resistance in any sense we understand it. I believe someone, or something, has decided that our processing centers made a mistake far greater than we realized when we swept up every human on this world without distinction. I thought of the empty rooms in the Western facility, the small chairs pushed neatly against the walls, the silence that had felt less like absence and more like something holding its breath. You believe they came for the children specifically, I said, not for tactical advantage, not to weaken our labor force or damage our operations. I believe, General, Draze said slowly, that we made an assumption when we treated human children the same as any other resource to be sorted and processed. I believe that assumption may be the single greatest mistake of this entire campaign. I did not sleep at all that night. I sat alone in my quarters, running the numbers again and again, trying to find some tactical explanation that made sense of what we were facing. I found none. Every model I built collapsed under the same simple, impossible fact. An enemy that left no trace, took no casualties on our side beyond confusion and lost time, and pursued only one target across a world of countless other targets it could have chosen instead. Somewhere out there, in the mountains and forests and cities I thought I had already conquered, someone was moving with a purpose sharper and more absolute than anything my long career had ever prepared me to face. And for the first time since I had taken command of my first campaign, I felt something I had almost forgotten the shape of. I felt afraid. Not of weapons, not of armies, not of anything my training had ever taught me to measure or counter. I felt afraid of what I still did not understand, and of the growing certainty that I was about to understand it in the worst possible way. The message arrived 4 days after the last convoy lost its children, and it did not come through any of our usual channels. It appeared instead on every screen aboard the Ashen Crown at once, bypassing security systems my engineers swore were impossible to breach. No demands, no threats. Just a single line of text, written in perfect formal language, as though whoever sent it wanted to be certain there was no possibility of misunderstanding. You took what does not belong to you, return what remains, or lose everything that came for it. I stared at that message for a long time before I called Drazez to my quarters. When he arrived, he read it twice in silence, and I watched the color drain slowly from his face, a reaction I had never once seen from him in 3 years of watching him face down enemy fire without flinching. "General, I need to show you something," he said. "I have been compiling data since the second facility fell, trying to understand what we are truly facing. I think it is time you saw all of it together." He laid out the full report on the table between us, and for the next hour, I read through everything his team had gathered, piece by piece, and felt the shape of my understanding change with every page. It began with the casualty reports from our supply lines, which I had reviewed before but never connected the way Draz had now connected them. In the 2 weeks since the first processing center fell silent, we had lost contact with 14 separate patrol units across the planet. Every single one had been operating near, or directly connected to, the transport and supply chains that served the 3 facilities where the children had been held. Not a single loss occurred anywhere else on the entire world, despite the fact that we maintained operations across every continent and every major settlement. 14 units, General, Draz said. Not destroyed, not engaged in combat, simply gone, the same way the children were gone. No bodies, no wreckage beyond what was left, intentionally, in perfect order, as though whoever did this wanted us to know it was deliberate rather than accidental. "You are certain there is no combat involved at all," I said. "None of our recovered soldiers, and there have been a small number recovered, released days later, at the edges of our territory unharmed, but unable to remember what happened to them, describe anything resembling a fight. They describe silence. Some describe a feeling of overwhelming exhaustion moments before losing consciousness. Not one of them describes seeing a face, a weapon, or a single attacker. I thought of the soldiers found in the convoy, frozen and confused, remembering nothing between the start of their journey and its unexpected end. An enemy that could remove trained, armed soldiers from a moving vehicle without leaving a mark on them was not an enemy fighting a war in any sense I understood. It was something closer to a force of nature, patient and precise, moving exactly as it intended and leaving behind only the evidence it chose to leave. "There is more, General," Draz said, and something in his voice told me the worst was still ahead. I asked my analysts to review every historical record we captured from the human planetary databases before communications went dark in the affected regions. I wanted to understand if there was any precedent in their own history for organized action of this precision, carried out by ordinary people rather than trained soldiers. And what did you find? I found that this world's history is filled with moments exactly like this one, General. Different centuries, different nations, different circumstances entirely, and yet the pattern repeats itself with an almost frightening consistency. Whenever a threat came near the children of a community, no matter how peaceful that community had been before, no matter how divided its people were on every other matter, something in them changed. Farmers became soldiers overnight. Ordinary citizens with no combat training carried out actions that professional armies could not have matched for sheer determination. And in nearly every recorded instance, once that change occurred, it did not stop until the threat was gone entirely, regardless of the cost to those who carried it out. I sat back slowly in my chair, feeling the full weight of what he was describing settle over me like something physical. "You are telling me this is not an organized resistance at all," I said. "You are telling me this is something closer to instinct." "I am telling you, General, that I believe we triggered something in this species that goes deeper than culture, deeper than military doctrine, deeper than anything we accounted for when we planned this campaign. We treated their children as we have treated the children of every species we have conquered before, as simply another resource to be managed. I do not believe humans experienced it that way at all. I believe to them, what we did was not an administrative decision. I believe it was closer to an act of war against the very core of what makes their species continue to exist." I thought back to my first days on this world, standing on the observation deck admiring the quiet lights of conquered cities, believing I was witnessing the peace of surrender. I understood now what I had actually been witnessing. Not peace, not surrender, the quiet gathering of something vast and terrible, drawing its strength together in the dark, while I mistook stillness for defeat. "Show me the casualty projections," I said quietly. Dreyes hesitated before pulling up the final section of his report, and when he did, I understood why he had waited until last to show me. In the 2 weeks since the first facility fell, our confirmed losses across the planet had climbed past 400 soldiers, not including the 14 units still listed as missing rather than confirmed lost. 400 soldiers, against a population that by every measure of military strength should not have been capable of mounting any organized resistance at all after the speed and completeness of our initial victory. And the trajectory, Dreyes's projections showed clearly, was not slowing down. It was accelerating, each incident more coordinated than the last, as though whatever force we had unleashed was only now beginning to gather its full strength. "There is one more thing, General," Dreyes said, and I could hear real reluctance in his voice now. I cross-referenced the names of our missing and confirmed lost soldiers against their assigned duties before this campaign began. And every officer who held direct command authority over the processing centers is among the missing or confirmed lost, General. Every one. The facility commanders, the transport coordinators, the officers who signed the orders authorizing the sorting and separation of the youngest humans from their families. Not a single one of them remains unaccounted for by chance. This is not random. Whoever is doing this knows exactly who gave the orders, and they are working through that list with total precision. I felt something cold settle into my chest, a feeling I recognized after a long moment as something I had not experienced in longer than I could remember. It was not the fear of losing a battle. I had lost battles before, in my early years, and recovered from them. This was different. This was the fear of an enemy who understood exactly what they were doing, who was not lashing out in desperation but executing a plan with total and terrible clarity, and who had marked me, specifically, as the source of everything that had gone wrong. "General," Dreyes said quietly, "I believe you are on that list as well." I did not answer him immediately. I stood instead and walked to the viewport, looking down once more at the world I had believed I conquered so easily 2 weeks before. The lights of human cities still burned below, and I no longer saw peace in them at all. I saw a slow, patient fire, spreading in silence, waiting for the moment it would finally reach me. "Dreyes," I said finally, my voice quieter than I intended. "When we began this campaign, what did the intelligence reports tell us about human family structures, about how they organize themselves around the raising of their young?" He checked his notes briefly before answering. "The reports described it as inefficient by our standards, General. Extended kinship networks, emotional attachment far beyond what we typically account for in species with comparable intelligence, and a level of individual investment in offspring that our analysts considered a strategic weakness. The reports suggested that removing children from a population would reduce resistance, since parents would be less willing to risk their own safety while the fate of their offspring remained uncertain. I closed my eyes, understanding now with total clarity the depth of the miscalculation that had brought us to this moment. Our analysts had read the weakness correctly and understood nothing about its true nature at all. They had seen emotional attachment and measured it as a vulnerability, a lever to be pulled to ensure compliance. They had never considered, not once in all their careful calculations, what might happen if that same attachment was pushed past the point of caution and into something with no ceiling at all. "Drazes," I said, turning back to face him. "Did they take the human children to protect them, or did they take them to free themselves from every reason to hold back?" Draz did not answer right away, and in his silence I found the answer I already feared was true. We had not weakened this world by threatening its children. We had removed the only thing that had ever made these people hesitate. In the days that followed, I ordered every historical archive we had captured from the Human Planetary Network brought directly to my quarters, and I began reading them myself rather than relying solely on Draz's summaries. I needed to understand this species in a way I had never bothered to before, not as a target to be conquered, but as something with a history I had underestimated at every turn. What I found unsettled me more than any battlefield report ever could. Human history, across thousands of years and countless divided nations, was filled with wars fought over resources, over land, over pride, over belief. Most of these conflicts followed patterns I recognized well, patterns common to nearly every species capable of organized violence. Armies formed, strategies were calculated, losses were weighed against gains, and when the cost grew too high, one side would eventually yield. But scattered through that same history, appearing again and again in every era and every culture, regardless of how different those cultures were in every other respect, I found accounts that followed no such pattern at all. Conflicts that began not from calculation, but from a single act, a threat or harm brought against the children of a community, after which the response given back bore no relationship whatsoever to ordinary military logic. Villages with no formal defense forces had organized resistance within hours. Untrained citizens had taken up whatever tools they possessed and moved with a coordination that professional soldiers struggled to match. And in nearly every recorded case, the fighting did not stop when the odds turned unfavorable. It stopped only when the threat itself was completely gone. I read one account from an old human historical record describing a small settlement whose children had been taken during a raid centuries before the technology existed for anything I would recognize as an army. The settlement had no soldiers, no weapons beyond what farmers might use against wild animals, and no formal leadership structure capable of organizing a response. And yet within 3 days, according to the record, every member of the raiding party had been found and dealt with by people who by every reasonable measure should not have been capable of such a thing. The record did not celebrate this as a triumph of strategy. It described it, almost matter-of-factly, as simply what happens. I called Draz to my quarters and showed him the passage. "This is not an isolated case," he said, after reading it carefully. "I found similar accounts across nearly every region of the planet, spanning thousands of years. Different weapons, different technology, different cultures with almost nothing else in common, but this same response, appearing again and again whenever their children came under threat." "You believe this is instinct rather than doctrine," I said, "something built into them at a level deeper than culture or training." "I believe, General, that every other conflict in human history, no matter how brutal, eventually reached a point where both sides calculated that continuing was no longer worth the cost. I can find no clear record of this particular kind of conflict ever ending that way. It ends only when the threat is removed entirely, regardless of the price paid to remove it." I set the record down slowly, feeling the full shape of my miscalculation settle over me at last. Then we are not facing an enemy who can be worn down through attrition. We are not facing an enemy who will eventually calculate that resistance costs more than it gains. No, General, I do not believe we are. I thought of every campaign I had led before this one, every conquered world that had eventually settled into quiet cooperation once resistance proved too costly to continue. I had always assumed humans would follow the same path, given enough time and enough pressure. I understood now that I had been measuring an entirely different kind of creature using the wrong instrument entirely. 3 more of my commanders were confirmed lost that week, each one connected directly to the original orders authorizing the processing centers. I increased security around every remaining officer on that list, myself included, doubling personal guards and restricting movement to only the most secure areas of the ship and surface installations. It made no measurable difference. A logistics officer named Threll, the same soldier who had brought me the very first report of a missing convoy weeks before, vanished from a fully secured supply depot despite being surrounded by armed guards at every entrance. When the recovery team searched the depot afterward, they found something that had not appeared in any of the previous incidents. A single object, left deliberately on the desk where Threll had been working. A child's toy, simple and worn, clearly belonging to one of the human children taken from the processing centers weeks before. I held that small object in my hands for a long time after it was brought to me, turning it over slowly, trying to understand what message it was meant to carry. It was not a threat in any conventional sense. It was something closer to a reminder, deliberate and precise, left behind by someone who wanted us to understand exactly why this was happening, in case we had somehow managed to forget. "They want us to know," I said quietly to Drazez, who stood beside me in the tactical room. "Every incident, every loss, every officer taken from a secured location. They want us to understand that none of this is random anger. It is a response, carried out with total intention, and they are making certain we cannot mistake it for anything else." "General," Drazez said carefully, "I have been reluctant to raise this, but I believe it is time. My analysts have completed a full projection based on the pattern of losses over the past 3 weeks. If this trajectory continues at its current rate, we will lose command capacity across this entire campaign within another 2 weeks. Not simply officers, command capacity itself. Every experienced leader capable of coordinating our forces on this world." I looked at the projection charts he laid before me, and I did not need his explanation to understand what I was seeing. We had come to this world expecting a conquest similar to 11 before it. We were instead watching our command structure dissolve, one careful, deliberate removal at a time, executed by an enemy that left almost no evidence beyond an empty space where a person used to stand. "What do our tacticians recommend?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "There is no tactical answer, General. Standard counterinsurgency doctrine assumes an enemy motivated by strategic goals, resources they wish to gain, or territory they wish to hold. This enemy has shown no interest in either. They are not trying to win a war in any sense our doctrine accounts for. They are trying to make it so costly for us to remain here that leaving becomes the only rational choice remaining." I thought of every conquered world behind me, worlds that had eventually settled because resistance always reached a point of diminishing returns, a point where continuing cost more than it gained. I understood now, with total clarity, that this world would never reach that point, not because its people were more powerful than any I had faced before, but because the calculation they were making was not the same calculation at all. They were not weighing cost against gain. They had removed cost from the equation entirely the moment we removed their children, because there was no cost too high to pay for getting them back. I stood alone that night in my quarters, holding the small, worn toy that had been left behind for me to find, and for the first time in my long career, I allowed myself to consider a possibility I had never once entertained on any of my previous 11 campaigns. I considered that I might have already lost this war, weeks ago, in the exact moment I signed the order to sort and separate the youngest humans from everyone they had ever known, without pausing to consider what that single decision might set into motion. I thought of the message that had appeared across every screen aboard my ship: return what remains, or lose everything that came for it. I understood now, far too late, that it had never been a threat. It had been a warning, offered once, by an enemy who did not make idle promises. I called a full council of my remaining officers on the morning of the 23rd day of the occupation, and I counted, as I entered the room, exactly how many chairs stood empty. 6 out of the 14 who had stood with me when we first arrived in orbit above this world, confident and untroubled by anything we might find below. The remaining 8 looked at me now the way soldiers look at a commander. They are beginning to doubt, not from disrespect, but from the plain and reasonable fear that comes from watching a plan fall apart around them with no clear end in sight. Vesic spoke first, as he often did when difficult truths needed saying. "General, whatever decision you intend to make, I ask that you make it soon. Morale across every garrison on this world has fallen further than I have seen in any campaign I have served in. Soldiers are requesting reassignment. Some are refusing patrol duty near the former processing center sites entirely." "I am aware," I said. "Then may I ask what you intend to do?" I looked around the room at the officers who remained, at the empty chairs beside them, and I thought of the small worn toy still sitting on the desk in my quarters, a quiet reminder I had not been able to bring myself to move or discard. I thought of the message that had appeared on every screen aboard my ship, and of the 11 worlds behind me that had never once required me to ask myself the question I was about to ask now. "I intend to withdraw our forces from this world," I said. The room went silent. Not the tense silence of disagreement, but the heavier silence of officers who had privately expected this outcome for days and were only now hearing it spoken aloud by the one person whose word would make it real. "General," Vesic said carefully, "the Empire will ask why. 11 successful campaigns, and then a full withdrawal from a 12th. There will be questions asked at the highest levels. Then I will answer them honestly," I said. "I will tell them that we made an error before we ever landed a single soldier on this world's surface. We measured this species using instruments built for every species that came before them, and those instruments failed us completely. We treated their children as a resource to be sorted and processed, the same as we have treated the children of every other conquered world, and in doing so, we removed the one thing that might have kept this population cautious. Instead, we gave them a reason with no ceiling on what they were willing to pay to answer it. You believe further engagement would only continue the losses we have already suffered," Draz said quietly from beside me. I believe, Draz, that further engagement would end with every officer in this room joining the 6 chairs already empty, and after that, every soldier we have stationed on this world, one careful, deliberate loss at a time, until there was nothing left here for the Empire to hold at all. I have led 11 campaigns to victory by understanding my enemy well enough to know when continuing would cost more than it could ever gain. I understand this enemy now. I understand that this is not a war we can win through patience, because patience is the very weapon they are using against us, and they have more of it than we do. I ordered a full withdrawal to begin within 48 hours, consolidating every remaining garrison for evacuation, abandoning the processing centers entirely, and releasing every human still held in our custody across the planet, without condition. I expected resistance to the order from within my own ranks, officers who had never in their careers watched a campaign end this way. I received none. I believe by that point, every soldier remaining on that world understood exactly what I understood, even if none of them could have explained it as clearly as Draz eventually did in the report he filed for the official record. On the final day, before boarding the Ashen Crown for the last time, I asked to be taken to the Western Processing Center, the first facility to fall silent all those weeks before. Draz accompanied me, along with a small honor guard, though by that point I no longer believed any weapon would be raised against me even if I walked that building alone. The facility stood exactly as we had found it weeks earlier, empty and undisturbed, as though time itself had simply stopped the moment the children were taken from it. I walked through the same rooms I had walked through on that first terrible night, past the small chairs still pushed neatly against the walls, and I found, in the very last room at the end of the hallway, a single object placed carefully in the center of the floor, exactly where anyone entering would be certain to see it. It was another toy, small and worn, left with the same quiet deliberation as the one found beside Threll's empty workstation weeks before. I understood, looking at it, that it was not a threat, and had never been a threat. It was a message, offered with total clarity by people who had never once needed to raise their voice to make themselves understood. This is what you took, remember it. I picked up the toy and held it for a long moment before placing it carefully into my coat, the same way I had kept the first one, rather than discarding it, as protocol would have suggested. I do not fully understand, even now, why I felt the need to keep them. Perhaps some part of me understood that I would need the reminder in the years ahead, when the temptation might arise to view this campaign as simply an unfortunate tactical failure rather than what it truly was. Before we lifted off from the surface for the final time, I recorded a message and transmitted it across every channel my ship could reach, addressed not to my own forces, but to every fleet and every commander across the Empire who might one day consider a campaign against this world or any world like it. I told them what I had learned, plainly and without exaggeration. I told them that I had conquered gods who commanded armies through sheer force of belief. I had conquered hive minds that sacrificed themselves without hesitation at the will of a single collective consciousness. I had conquered machine intelligences that calculated every possible outcome before committing to a single course of action, and I had defeated every one of them because somewhere in their nature there existed a point past which continuing the fight no longer made sense. I told them that I had found no such point in humanity, not because they were stronger than any enemy I had faced before, and not because their weapons or their strategies were superior to ours. I told them I had found no such point because we had made the single greatest error possible in any campaign against this species. We had shown them, without meaning to, that there was nothing left to lose, and a species with nothing left to lose does not calculate risk the way every other creature in the galaxy does. It simply continues, patiently and completely, until the thing that was taken is returned, or until nothing remains standing between them and it. My final order, transmitted to every corner of the Empire before we left that system for the last time, was simple and absolute. Whatever world you encounter belonging to this species, whatever resistance you expect to face, remember what happened here. Leave their children alone or do not set foot on their worlds at all, because there is no force in this empire large enough to stand against a promise that patient, and no commander skilled enough to outweigh a people who have already decided they are willing to pay anything at all to see it kept. As the Ashen Crown broke orbit, and the blue and green world fell away behind us, I stood once more on the observation deck, where I had first admired the quiet lights of a world I believed I had already conquered. I understood now what that quiet had truly been, and I understood that I would carry the memory of this campaign with me for the rest of my career, not as a defeat exactly, though it certainly was one, but as a lesson I would never again allow myself to forget. I had led 11 successful conquests before arriving at this world, each one built on the same careful understanding of how enemies think, how they calculate, and how they eventually yield when the cost of resistance grows too high to bear. Humanity had taught me, at great cost to every officer I lost along the way, that some costs are never too high at all. I keep both toys in my quarters still, years later, on a small shelf where I can see them each morning before I begin my duties. Officers who visit sometimes ask about them, curious about objects so plainly out of place aboard a warship of the Empire. I tell them the truth, every time, without exception. I tell them that I once believed I understood every enemy the galaxy could offer, until I paused on a quiet observation deck, looked down at a world of ordinary people going about lives I thought I had already conquered, and asked myself a single question I should have asked long before we ever separated a single human family in the first place. Did they take the human children? I never received a formal answer to that question, not from any report, not from any officer, not from any intelligence gathered across 3 long weeks of quiet, devastating loss. I did not need one. The empty chairs around my council table gave me the answer clearly enough. So did the silence that followed us all the way home.